Senhoras e senhores, no âmbito da sessão O Insustentável Peso da Utopia, damos as boas-vindas às convidadas do Fórum do Futuro. Coco Fusco, artista multidisciplinar e escritora, e a diretora académica da Escola Superior Artística do Porto, Eduarda Neves.
É preciso microfone, ouve-se bem agora. Esta conferência, como dizia agora, como falava agora com o Guilherme, vai ser um verdadeiro crossing, vai ser em 3 línguas, em português, que vai ser a minha apresentação, a comunicação, a conferência da Coco, que vai ser em inglês, e o nosso diálogo, que vai ser em espanhol, no meu mau espanhol, mas vamos conseguir comunicar eu e ela e convosco. Portanto, passaria então à apresentação da artista, com licença, porque isto sem óculos já não vai lá. E então, Coco Fusco é uma artista cubano-americana, artista e escritora, portanto, que vive em Nova Iorque. O seu extenso trabalho artístico e a sua produção teórico-crítica, sem fronteiras disciplinares, coloca problemas em torno do pós-colonialismo e raça, globalização e trabalho e a Cuba pós-revolucionária. A performance e o vídeo desempenham um papel central no seu trabalho, a que podemos chamar as suas máquinas delasianas, as suas máquinas de guerra. É nelas que Coco encontra o seu singular espaço de superação, que, já agora, em português, rima com transgressão. Com essas ferramentas, opera uma espécie de retorno ao real, denunciando os aparelhos ideológicos do Estado. O seu trabalho político evoca, por vezes, o território da crítica institucional, confrontando-nos com leituras que denunciam os mecanismos do poder do Estado, incluindo o poder militar de Cuba. Assim, defende que os artistas e os intelectuais tenham sido vistos desde os anos 60, tanto por Fidel como por Ernesto Guevara, como um perigo para o Estado cubano. No entanto, tenham sido os artistas e os intelectuais a funcionarem como uma importante projeção e de imagem transparente da Cuba e do poder cubano. Entendidos como burgueses e defendendo a sua subjetividade própria, são eles, os artistas e os intelectuais, associados também em Cuba a um certo universo homossexual. Coco foi recentemente proibida de entrar no seu país, pois talvez o governo tenha lido o seu livro Dangerous Steps, Performance and Politics in Cuba. Não sei se Coco Fusco continua a pensar, e nas palavras da artista, que a Bienal de Havana tem sido a janela de sedução para os estrangeiros convencidos de que Cuba é o paraíso para os artistas. Coco diz ainda que a liberdade em vários contextos e governos limita os caminhos do protesto. E acrescentaria eu que isto diz respeito a todos nós. Coco, welcome. Deixo-vos com a Coco Fusco.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to go quickly because I thought I had more time, and then I learned just this week that I have half the time, so I cut down. I'm reading only a part of a longer piece called The Unbearable Weight of Utopia, but I thought I should start by just saying a word about, I found out you guys are celebrating Magellan. I thought that you thought he was a traitor because he sailed for Spain and didn't sail for Portugal. But also, he didn't really finish circumnavigating the globe because he was killed by a Filipino in Mactan named Lapu-Lapu, and this painting is a painting, an homage to the killer of Magellan that is in the Philippines at a shrine. It's only important to me insofar as this person, Lapu-Lapu, was later with the establishment of the Philippines, named the first Filipino hero. And so he's an example of indigenous resistance that's been co-opted by a contemporary nationalist movement. And similarly, in Cuba, we have Hatuey, who was a Taino who led a fight against the Spaniards but was eventually killed. But he is represented by the revolutionary government as the first rebel of America, right? So he becomes the starting point of a teleological narrative that legitimates the revolutionary state as the inheritor of the tradition. And every rebel wants to model him, every rebel in Latin America always models himself, and it's usually men, on these ideas of indigenous, the innate rebelliousness of the indigenous against colonial rule. This is also commercialized through like the production of Malta, Hatuey, and there's also a beer label called Hatuey in Cuba. This is not only the 500th anniversary of the supposed circumnavigation of the globe, it's also the 500th anniversary this week of the founding of the city of Havana. And that anniversary is now fraught with the question of what constitutes rebellion and who represents the people. The King of Spain is scheduled to make a visit next week, and this has been extremely controversial. The Spanish government authorized his visit even though he doesn't want to go. And he doesn't want to go because he knows who he's going to meet there. In addition to Raúl Castro, he's going to meet Nicolás Maduro, Vladimir Putin, and Daniel Ortega, and he will be in a photo with all the dictators of the extreme left. So he doesn't want to go. The Spanish government is divided as to whether or not he should go, but the Cuban opposition also doesn't want him to go, and there was an editorial today in the main opposition newspaper, which is published in Madrid, saying because the King of Spain refuses to meet with the opposition, then he also should not go. Okay, so that is the moment that we're in terms of the relationship to the colonizer, who's still a very important figure for Cuba, and every rebel in the history of Cuba has always wanted to be recognized by the king. We're still in that paradigm. Okay, I'm going to start my presentation with a short video. It is a clip that was sent to me by Cuban artists who are part of this movement against Decree 349. I will be talking about Decree 349, but I wanted you to hear it from them first. Oops.
No vamos a hacer lo que diga nadie, vamos a hacer lo que nuestra conciencia dicta, vamos a aceptar o vamos a rechazar. Pero nuestra voz tiene que ser escuchada y nuestra opinión siempre va a hacerse escuchar y se va a hacer valer. Y bueno, los resultados fueron los mejores.
Hay un momento en que tú te cuestionas si tú no estás apretando demasiado, hasta dónde hay una cuestión de ego y de querer ganar esa batalla, o hasta dónde de verdad está una preocupación cívica legítima tuya.
Estábamos en un momento donde se estaba haciendo una consulta por un tema que era la nueva Constitución y un asunto tan menor, de alguna manera, no se estaba consultando. Se tiró un decretazo y basta.
Justo en esa situación, Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara lanza un performance muy escandaloso y lanza las protestas contra este decreto como una gran ofensa a la dignidad del arte y del artista en Cuba.
Nosotros tradujimos este escuadrón al francés, al inglés, al alemán, y nosotros decíamos, léete esto. Léete simplemente esto y dime si tú quieres que esto te lo apliquen en tu país.
La obscenidad, la contrarrevolución y determinadas conductas están descritas de una manera totalmente subjetiva. No hay pautas para esto. Cualquier persona involucrada en el mundo cultural es potencialmente un delincuente.
mí nada más que me parece el 349 un juego, una magnífica historia de la literatura.
Los artistas le leían pedazos del decreto y los funcionarios decían que eso que decía ahí no se iba a aplicar así.
No son evidentes, sino que son censuras que viven en el no quiero o en el no se sabe o en el... No, fundamentalmente viven en el por qué vamos a molestarnos.
En mi experiencia personal, y quisiera que fuera la de mucha más gente, la de muchos más jóvenes, la de muchos más ciudadanos, es la posibilidad de un despertar político y cívico. En un país donde estamos profundamente dormidos, profundamente cansados, profundamente asustados.
Okay. Cuba existed for me as an idea before I understood it as a place. I have no recollection. I'm the little baby with the red arrow, next to the red arrow. I have no recollection of my first trip there as an infant, but my memories of childhood include dramatic scenes at airports as relatives fleeing communism arrived only with the clothes on their backs. I remember teaching English to my cousins and feeling superior, singing songs in Spanish about a lost paradise, banging on my mother's buttocks while singing Babaluaye, an impudent imitation of Ricky Ricardo on I Love Lucy, and answering endless questions from Americans about Fidel Castro. In those days, Fidel loomed large. He was a real-life bad guy, long before Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden hit the airwaves. Fidel stole American businesses, nearly blew up the US to smithereens with Russian missiles, hypnotized journalists with his charisma, and subjected islanders to a harsh life under the watchful eyes of the state. Cuban exiles in Miami and Cold Warriors in Washington denounced his revolution as a tropical gulag, but Fidel was communism's Latin lover and a hero to every leftist on the planet. For anti-imperialists, Fidel was a bearded David triumphing over Uncle Sam the Goliath. Fidel and his people were one, and together they were Cuba. And that Cuba was Utopia. 60 years later, the characterization of Cuba as Utopia is hard for Cubans to live with. It conjures a romantic vision of the revolution for outsiders, but it disciplines conduct for islanders. It restricts political engagement to the perpetual avowal of socialism as the only way forward. It imposes the ideological blinders that delimit how one should think, and it unifies efforts to commodify Cuba's past for tourist consumption. It's not enjoyable to play the role of the revolutionary subject for globe-trotting progressives, especially when the contradictions between rhetoric and reality are blatantly apparent in everyday life. It's hard to believe that you're creating a new society when every building around you is crumbling and every authority figure is old enough to be your great-grandfather. It's hard to believe that the US blockade is the sole cause of your problems when wave after wave of state officials are arrested for corruption and theft. But generations of Cubans were made to sacrifice their present to build a future based on that utopia. For 30 years, they gave up family ties, leisure time, privacy, a free press and free expression, organized religion, and civil liberties to gain access to that utopia. Then the Cold War ended and Cuba lost its political mooring and its Soviet subsidies. The island's economy plummeted. Its government welcomed back tourism and accepted remittances from so-called enemy exiles that deserted the fatherland, but maintained its hold through repressive surveillance, harsh penalties for dissidents, restricted internet access, and travel restrictions. Younger Cubans have grown up in a post-Soviet era and they view the utopian project as foreign to their own existence. 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that utopian vision of the future has become a relic of the past, recycled by an ossified state apparatus as a defense against change, and packaged for fellow travelers and tourists. The country's current dependence on tourism and the art world's treatment of its artists as socialist lab rats compels Cubans to perform utopian subjecthood for their daily bread. This tiny country in the Caribbean has played an outsized role not only in American politics, but also in the collective imaginary of people around the world. The time has come, though, to say goodbye to utopia. I'm going to borrow Vandana Shiva's terminology from last night to explain. We'd do better to think of the Cuban state as a corporation owned by the military. All local initiatives, from independent farming to cultural production, are either suppressed or criminalized, treated as if they pose a threat to the state's monopoly. To address the contradiction between the myth and reality is not only a challenge to the legitimacy of a totalitarian state, it is a call to imagine a future political order in Latin America that rejects the authoritarian tendencies of nationalist and populist movements of the past and the present. For many outside Cuba, the revolution only matters because it counts as a victory against the United States. For most, the revolution is just about Fidel Castro and his charisma. For others, Cuba means free education and health care. For a few years in the 1990s, Cuba was the nostalgic melodies of the Buena Vista Social Club. In the decades since the end of the Cold War, most people have forgotten how Cuba became the enemy. Few know that Che Guevara was in charge of extrajudicial executions in 1959, or that Cuba managed to infiltrate the Pentagon, or that it has the highest incarceration rates and one of the lowest ratings for press freedoms in the hemisphere. For tourists, Cuba is a world frozen in time, full of vintage cars, rotary phones, colonial buildings, and Che Guevara portraits on anything you could imagine, from T-shirts to public plazas. Foreigners continue to arrive in search of an idea of what they think Cuba is, and among them are many who want very badly for the revolution to fulfill their ideas of what social justice, third world nationalism, and socialism should be. In the stoicism and tenacity of Cubans who deal with endless food and energy shortages, low wages, scant material goods, many foreigners find evidence of the revolutionary subjects that capitalist societies are wont to produce. The embargo gets blamed for all the country's economic woes without any attention to Cuba's overdependence on imports, the deficiencies of centralized planning, and government mismanagement. Miami's political extremists dominate the current political debate in the United States, while neoliberal advocates of engagement only talk about the transformative power of small business. What Cubans think, want, or don't want to do doesn't figure in this scenario. Cubans on the island have only one party to vote for, while most Cubans living in the US choose not to vote for all. For example, of the Cubans who arrived after 1990, only 18% of them voted in 2016. In that very limited discursive field, culture is only relevant insofar as it supports a revolutionary project or if it succeeds in the global marketplace and brings hard currency and political legitimacy to a failed state. My work in Cuba over the past 30 years has focused largely on visual art, although for some, art is defined as an essentially apolitical or disinterested endeavor. For Cubans, it is a site of endless political struggle, because art is one of the few arenas in which individuality and criticality can be made visible in a country where the state retains a monopoly on television, cinema, journalism, and publishing. Yvonne Grenier, a Canadian political scientist and Cuba scholar, has a very precise and useful way of characterizing the dilemma for Cuban intellectuals and artists who try to articulate a vision of the future through critique. In Cuba, he notes, one must speak of politics without speaking about power. This is a necessary depoliticization that guarantees a place in public life, the benefits bestowed on official intellectuals, and avoidance of social death. In a country where every aspect of life is politicized, there are very few spaces in which to discuss the political process. The term that defines discursive participation is parámetro, or parameter, suggesting standards, benchmarks, and limits. In Cuba, expression in art, popular culture, academic research, and journalism has been determined by Fidel's famous phrase from 1961 that invokes a limit. Within the revolution, everything; outside the revolution, nothing. To operate beyond the limits is defined as the work of an enemy, a mercenary, and an agent of imperialism. The parameters of acceptability in critique demand that the revolution be characterized as continuous and inevitable, that socialism is always being constructed, that errors are caused by bad bureaucrats and are not structural, and that the problems to be addressed are ones already cited by state officials. The solution to every dilemma is greater adherence to the party line, increased volunteerism, and official debates in which only members of state organizations and the Communist Party may participate. Parámetro also recalls la parametración policies of the 1970s, in which cultural workers and educators were censored, fired, banished, and imprisoned because of their sexual preferences, religious beliefs, or contacts with anyone abroad. While the Cuban state exercises control over creative expression, it also gains prestige and legitimacy internationally by presenting itself as a beneficent promoter of culture and education. Cuba's status as a cultural superpower depends on its being able to demonstrate through cutting-edge art that undercuts its tarnished human rights record, which explains why state security strains to keep its criticality and its influence in check. The state manages this situation with a carrot-and-stick strategy. Since the early 1990s, or the end of the Cold War, Cuban artists have been allowed to sell their work in hard currency, and their work is in demand, unlike most other things Cuba produces for export. So artists who are supported by the state enjoy an unusually high standard of living in a place where most people are extremely poor. The unspoken rule is that you must stay inside the parameters of acceptable discourse to enjoy the status and live large. Even artworks bought by foreign collectors that are considered controversial are subject to confiscation before export. One of the most difficult things to grasp about how the Cuban state works with regard to culture is that it operates simultaneously as an enabler and a repressor. The state subsidizes education, buys and exhibits art, and promotes artists internationally, while it also acts as a censor, controls access to arts professions based on political criteria, and regulates behavior by withholding privileges and imposing punishment. Cuba's supporters stress the enabler function, while anti-Castro conservatives only focus on censorship. But the system's effectiveness is due precisely because of its duality. It would not attract adherents that serve its ideological purpose without offering benefits, nor can it maintain its monopoly on distribution of information without repression. In my research, I chart a history that is not officially acknowledged and even intentionally suppressed, that of artists trying to break the silence from within. My last book, Dangerous Moves, Performance and Politics in Cuba, for example, focused on the role that performance art has played as a catalyst for critique of politicization of behavior and the control of public space. The videos that I've made over the past few years have been about the revolution's poet maudits, outcasts not for their insanity or vices, but for their political views. So the most recent pieces I've made are about Eberto Padilla, Reinaldo Arenas, and if I have time at the end, I'll show you a clip from that one, and Maria Elena Cruz Varela. For a long time, counter-histories were transmitted orally among cultural practitioners, contained in independent libraries, and smuggled out of prisons and out of the country. In the past 15 years, as internet access has slowly expanded in Cuba, more and more counter-histories are appearing in social media, online publications, and visual art. The government doesn't have the same level of control over the internet as it does over publishing, radio, and television, and it is losing its audience as Cubans under 40 turn to pirated media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For the past year, I have participated in the efforts of artists working in Cuba who are opposed to Decree 349. I've been particularly impressed by the openness and broad-based nature of these interventions, which is highly unusual for the Cuban cultural scene. Cuba's penal code includes the crime of social dangerousness. The list of activities that run counter to socialist morality runs from public drunkenness and insanity to open expression of political dissent. Artists are subject to sanction for public disorder, circulating enemy propaganda, disrespect to national figures, and public scandal. Despite the very real threat of arrest, expulsion from work, or social death, in the past year, various cultural sectors representing independent film, music, independent journalism, and visual art have organized and made their dissent public. This was the beginning of the statement from young independent filmmakers. Just last month, 19 independent journalism outlets banded together to publish La Declaración de los Medios Independientes Cubanos, demanding that the Cuban government heed its own constitution and cease its aggression against them, arguing that a free press was essential for the country's development. And in the last year, there have been a lot of intellectuals and activists have started to use social media to build collective action. This was in response to the tornado of January 19 that leveled entire neighborhoods in Havana, one of them Regla, and in response to the state's inertia, a lot of intellectuals started going on Facebook complaining about the lack of response and organizing collectively aid for the victims of the tornado. There was also the instance of the independently organized Gay Pride March last May. This had been organized year after year by Mariela Castro under the control of Cenesex, but she decided this year that it was too dangerous to do the march because it would be, quote unquote, taken advantage of by mercenaries and enemies of the revolution, and the gay community said, screw you, we want to have a march, we want our gay pride, and we're going to do it. And so they went out and did it, and they were met by police who made several arrests. There was also, in June, many young people who are involved in either social media, activism, cultural production of different kinds, depend very much on Facebook and Twitter and access to the internet to be able to do their work, and there's a monopoly on telecommunications that makes the price of internet access extremely high, and so they've started doing Twitter wars against ETEXA, which is the Cuban government's telecommunications monopoly. Decree 349 is a law that went into effect last December that criminalizes independent artistic activity. That means that any cultural activity that does not have prior authorization from the Ministry of Culture can be shut down at any time. The decree empowers a roving cadre of inspectors to enter any artist's home studio or privately owned bar or exhibition venue and determine whether the activity constitutes an infringement. Penalties range from fines to confiscation of equipment, forfeiture of artistic licenses to engage in independent commerce, and seizure of property. Cuban authorities claim that the new law is actually designed to protect, quote-unquote, true artists from intrusion into their field from people the state deems not to be real artists. But for its critics, this is a way of ferreting out activist-oriented art practices. The arrests in the past year of cultural activists who tried to protest the law suggest that the distinction is, in fact, political and not professional. The rhetoric of the law also stresses that it is designed to diminish public disturbance by forcing musicians to lower their volume and imposing controls on purportedly racist and sexist content. Insiders read this as a veiled attack on the independent reggaeton and rap scenes, which are associated with Cuba's vast and largely black underclass and infamous for their chronicles of popular discontent. Decree 349 is best understood in relation both to what the government's current treatment of all independent business sectors and also in relation to the history of attempts to control and instrumentalize culture. When he assumed leadership in 2008, Raúl Castro implemented reforms that allowed for a small private sector consisting of taxi services, room rentals, small restaurants, beauty salons, electronic repairs, and cultural endeavors. That sector is heavily taxed and subject to restrictions that frequently change, causing great frustration. Together with the new constitution that was recently approved, Cuba's cash-strapped government has ushered in a host of new regulations for the private sector that led to work stoppages by taxi drivers. The artists' protests coincide with the expressions of discontent in these other sectors. The government's attempt to put brakes on the independent sectors illustrates the leadership's ambivalence towards Cuba's transition from a centralized to a mixed economy. The more private wealth Cubans have, the less control the state has over them. Decree 349 is not an aberration from a norm of generalized freedom to create. The Cuban Revolution had a cultural policy before it had a ministry of culture. Within the revolution, everything; outside the revolution, nothing, which I've already mentioned. That phrase from Fidel's 1961 speech, Words to the Intellectuals, provided the rationalization for the first censorship of a Cuban film and inaugurated the closure of most press outlets and led to the establishment of an artists and writers union that regulated access to cultural professions and meted out privileges based on good political conduct. In the 1960s, while the Cuban government sponsored Latin America's literary boom, it also rounded up homosexuals, hippies, and rock music lovers into labor camps. By the early 1970s, while cultural centers were erected throughout the island, all Cuban artists and intellectuals were deemed suspect of ideological diversionism, which means critical thinking and too much interest in Western culture. And many of the island's most famous cultural figures were subject to social death. In the 1980s, the Cuban art scene underwent a renaissance as the quote-unquote children of Che, which is my generation, graduated from art schools and garnered international acclaim. But by the end of the decade, thousands of artists fled the country in response to waves of censorship. To stave off this exodus during the 1990s, when Cuba desperately needed ideological legitimacy and hard currency after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the government began to allow artists deemed acceptable to travel frequently and earn in hard currency. Then in 2013, the government eliminated exit visas for most Cubans, and even the unacceptable intellectuals could travel, make money abroad, and invest in their home-based productions. That diminished the hegemonic power of the Ministry of Culture and the Artists and Writers Union to determine who would enjoy the legal status of artist. Cultural sectors that had operated semi-clandestinely started to come out into the open, evading censorship by distributing their productions online, hosting events in private homes, and raising money through crowdfunding schemes. This is a high-risk gray area, but for some it's worth taking chances, especially for rap and reggaeton musicians. The gray area offers a way for them to support their families. The history I have outlined informs the present. In the spring of 2019, Cuba hosted its 13th Arts Biennial, the most important promotional event for the visual arts. Cuban artists often make enough money from sales during the biennial to live for a year or two. The event is their chance to hobnob with foreign arts professionals that offer invitations to residencies and exhibitions, as well as collectors. Due to the number of foreign visitors, the biennial is also a major source of tourist income for the state. This biennial was postponed in 2017, ostensibly due to damage caused by Hurricane Irma, and this generated great disappointment. As a result, a group of independent artists that includes several autodidacts proposed to create an alternative 0-0 biennial, which essentially was a small-scale open studio event in the spring of 2018, just as the new president Díaz-Canel was taking office and the plans for a new constitution were made public. They did not intend to steal the show from the cultural ministry, nor did they have the means to do so. They argued that artists needed a positive way to channel their energies and commune with the Cuban public. The state's reaction, though, was extremely aggressive. The alternative biennial organizers were publicly excoriated and accused of being financed by the CIA. Accusatory videos were circulated at art schools and artist union meetings to dissuade people from participating or attending. State security issued threats against the organizers and created a cordon sanitaire around the main locations of the events. Police sought out the foreign artists that were able to slip into the country for the event and told them that they would be deported if they participated. While I was turned away at immigration, other artists were detained at customs and had the contents of their luggage confiscated. Nonetheless, the event was proceeded under duress, and the organizers declared victory. 2 months later, in July 2018, Decree 349 was announced in the Gaceta de Cuba. Rap musicians immediately began to denounce the decree at concerts, leading to the arrest of rapper Michael Osorbo and the cancellation of concerts. Osorbo was just released a couple of weeks ago after serving 11 months in prison. 2 groups of artists emerged as leaders of the protest, and they followed 2 different strategies, one radical and one reformist. The reformist group, called Sin 349, which is the one that made the video you saw at the beginning, consisted of artists and arts professionals that were educated at Cuba's top schools and that have a history of exhibiting in state venues. They believed that discreet, non-publicized encounters with officials in which they outlined their concerns in writing could lead to adaptation or rescinding of the decree. Within 2 months, they realized that the officials were not going to budge, and they went public, revealing not only their complaints, but also damning transcripts of their meetings with cultural ministers. The radicals of the San Isidro group, consisting largely of self-taught artists that work outside state channels, together with Tania Bruguera, opted for direct action, street protests, didactic videos that were circulated on social media, and an extensive online campaign that engaged Cubans abroad as well as those on the island. Their actions culminated in attempts to stage sit-ins in front of the Ministry of Culture in early December 2018, during the week before the law went into effect, and it led to multiple arrests. At the end of the protests, the groups came together for a celebratory game of soccer, an unprecedented show of unity in the arts community. Both groups garnered substantial international press attention, and the government was faced with an unanticipated crisis of its international image. In response, Cuban officials created a multi-layered damage control strategy. They went on Cuban television to insist that there were many artists who supported the decree, that the state had, quote unquote, no choice other than to control the public nuisance factor, and that the decree would not go into effect until more detailed regulations appropriate for the arts were formulated. But subsequent to then, there have been constant arrests and harassment of artists, so it is in effect. What was communicated to the foreign press was that the decree, would not be put into effect yet. And then the political management of the biennial began in full force. Anticipating the state's actions, Cuban artists adopted a variety of counter-strategies that would draw attention to the repressive state apparatus. And as a participant in that effort, my job was to encourage international press coverage of the suppression of artists, which I kicked off by flying to Havana to record my immediate deportation and send it to the press. So I'm going to have to stop there because I'm running out of time. Can I play a clip? Is it okay? Okay, so this is the last video that I made last year, and with artists from the San Isidro group and other independent groups. And everybody in the film is persona non grata in the country, and we wanted to go back to the place where Reinaldo Arenas, who is probably Cuba's most famous writer of the post-revolutionary period, was also a persona non grata and living as a fugitive and conducting secret literary salon in the early 1970s. So I located one of his friends who's still alive, who would bring him food when he was a fugitive, and he told me where the spot was in El Parque Lenin, in Lenin Park. And so we went there to do this piece, and it's half an hour long, so I don't have time for that, but I'll just play you a little bit. Mis amigos Iris y Amaury viajaron de Alamar hasta Arroyo Naranjo en guagua, retomando tu odisea para encontrarte con Arenas. Amaury es un poeta autodidacta que molesta por su candor. Con su esposa Iris ha creado una obra genial que documenta lo absurdo de tener que obtener permiso para permanecer en el apartamento donde han vivido durante años con sus hijos. Let me see if I can get it this way. Oops. Por su ausencia. Iris ha creado una obra genial que documenta lo absurdo de tener que obtener permiso para permanecer en el apartamento donde han vivido durante años con sus hijos. No sabemos si la vegetación del parque ha cambiado mucho desde que estuviste aquí. No sabemos exactamente dónde eran los encuentros, pero nos acercamos a la zona del anfiteatro que Arenas menciona en sus cartas. ¿De qué sirve rendir homenaje a unos bardos extranjeros en este lugar? La biografía de cada poeta repasa momentos de la maldita vida del cubano que se escondió aquí. El estilo satírico de Lu Xun fue condenado por Mao Zedong. El zar Alexander I le obligó a Pushkin a exiliarse por su oda a la libertad. Shevchenko fue condenado por ridiculizar a los aristócratas rusos. Eloy Blanco editó un periódico disidente y estuvo preso por 4 años. Y ahí viene una de las pocas representaciones que queda del famoso bolchevique, que aún no ha sido derribada. Nuestra amiga Lynn
La actriz que espanta a la oficialidad con sus monólogos incisivos llegó por otro lado. Acaba de perder un gran amigo y su tristeza le pesa.
Sé que más allá de la muerte está la muerte. Sé que más acá de la vida está la estafa. Sé que no existe consuelo, ni la tierra anhelada de mis sueños.
El anfiteatro, por supuesto, tiene su vigilante. Nos dejó trabajar, pero como buen vigilante, no dejó de vigilarnos. Aunque sea una construcción de los años 70, parece ser una ruina del Imperio Romano.
Sé que más allá de la muerte está la muerte.
Sé que más acá de la vida está la estafa.
Sé que no existe el consuelo,
Que no existe la anhelada tierra de mis sueños.
ni la desgarrada visión de nuestros héroes.
Pero te seguimos buscando, patria.
En las traiciones del recién llegado.
Y en las mentiras del primer cronista.
Sé que no existe el refugio del abrazo
Y que Dios es un estruendo de hojalata.
Pero te seguimos buscando, patria.
En las amenazas del nuevo impostor.
En las palmas que revientan buldoseadas.
En la visión, ¿no? Sé que no existe en la visión.
Sé que no existe la
Sé
visión.
que no existe la visión del que siempre perece entre las llamas.
Y que no existe la tierra presentida. Pero te seguimos buscando.
Tierra. En el incesante roer, en el roer incesante de las aguas.
En el reventar de mangos y mameyes.
En el tecleteo de las estaciones. Y en la
confusión de todos los gritos. Sé que no existe la
Sé
zona.
que no existe la zona del descanso. Que faltan
alimentos para el sueño. Y que
no hay puertas
en el medio del espanto.
Pero te seguimos buscando, puertas.
En las costas usurpadas de metralla.
En la caligrafía de los delincuentes.
En el insustancial delirio de una conga. Sé que hay un torrente
de ofensas aún guardadas y arsenales de armas estratégicas.
Y que hay palabras malditas, que hay prisiones.
Y que en ningún sitio está el árbol que no existe, pero
te seguimos buscando, árbol.
Well, I think that's all we can do for today. So I'm going to stop there so that we can have the conversation. Okay. Sorry.
Coco, has hablado sobre el decreto. Pienso que no es muy importante insistir, pero hay que referir que el decreto 349, a pesar de ser el resultado de una necesidad puntual, es el tributo a una práctica sistémica en Cuba sobre la administración del mundo del arte que el poder cubano históricamente hace. Un aspecto que hablamos y que no está en tu conferencia, pero me parece que es muy importante para ti personalmente como artista y que tal vez es importante que las personas conozcan, es el espacio de Sandra Ceballos, que que es importante hablar, lo pienso. ¿Quieres?
Bueno, okay. El espacio aglutinador fue la primera iniciativa independiente dentro de la plástica cubana para crear una galería que no perteneciera al Estado. Fue fundado por Sandra Ceballos y Ezequiel Suárez, dos artistas que en el 94, en pleno periodo especial, fueron censurados y decidieron trasladar la exposición que fue censurada a la casa donde ellos vivían, que era un apartamentico chiquito en el Vedado. Y yo creo que, bueno, causó sensación, fue un gran éxito y de allí decidieron seguir con la práctica, que es una práctica que también existe en China, también existió en la Unión Soviética, en muchos países del este, de convertir el apartamento privado en un espacio cultural cuando el Estado no permite que ciertas cosas ocurran, ¿no? Y ella ha seguido, incluso ahora en la semana que viene va a ser otro proyecto, una subasta de ropa de artista, porque el anuncio dice que estamos en capítulo 2 del periodo especial, cuando ya no se puede comprar nada y no se puede vender arte porque nadie lo compra, porque nadie tiene dinero. Entonces en el momento que no compras arte puedes comprar ropa de otros, entonces vendrán todos los artistas a recircular su ropa como nadie puede circular arte. Pero siempre hay eventos allí, hay conferencias, hay exposiciones y sigue. Y bueno, hay otros artistas que después de Sandra han seguido con la idea, pero hay pocos que han trabajado con consistencia, o sea, de hacerlo todo el tiempo. Muchos solamente hacen exposiciones en casa durante la Bienal para atraer a los extranjeros. Y ella lo hace para la comunidad dentro de Cuba.
Então, sem querer monopolizar a conversa, iria abrir a discussão, ou se alguém quiser colocar alguma questão. 5 minutos.
Ya.
Me llamo Cristina Irindi, pasaba mucho tiempo en Cuba, escribí un libro sobre cultura y religión afrocubana y realmente no estoy de acuerdo con todo lo que dice, pero no soy cubana y no puedo realmente, yo no sé cuál ha sido su experiencia, pero era interesante saber un poquito sobre cuánto tiempo pasaba en Cuba y cuándo fue, y sí, porque estaba hablando de una época, los años 60 y los años 70, pero y lo que ha pasado últimamente, pero quería saber de si su experiencia en Cuba siempre fue así o no.
Yo no estoy hablando de mi experiencia en Cuba, yo estoy hablando de la experiencia de los artistas en Cuba.
Sí.
Yo llevo, la primera vez que yo fui a Cuba tenía un mes de edad. Yo básicamente era una rehén de mi madre. Mi madre llegó a Estados Unidos antes de la revolución. Ella no era gusana, ni tampoco era de la élite, no trabajaba para Batista y tampoco era blanca. Entonces ella no fue de la primera ola de ultra aristócratas cubanos que se fueron huyendo porque perdieron su propiedad. Ella vino a Estados Unidos para terminar su carrera y fue deportada a Cuba en el 59 cuando triunfa la revolución, pero no quiso volver y ella salió en estado conmigo y me llevó a Cuba para poder usarme de rehén para salir, que es lo que hacía mucha gente en esa época, ¿no? O sea, también han oído hablar de los vuelos de Peter Pan, de como unos 35,000 niños cubanos fueron enviados por sus padres en los años 60 a Estados Unidos para hacer lo mismo, para usarlos del otro lado, para organizar la emigración de sus padres usando al niño como sponsor. Yo fui sponsor de mi mamá. Yo conocí a un grupo de artistas cubanos a mediados, bueno, yo conocí a Ana Mendieta, y a través de ella y de un padrino mío conocí a un grupo de artistas cubanos que me invitaron a Cuba a mediados de los 80 y yo empecé a viajar con frecuencia. Entonces, yo llevo como 35 años yendo a Cuba y he escrito, bueno, el libro, he hecho varias películas, trabajo desde los años 90 con Sandra en el espacio aglutinador, o sea, llevo mucho tiempo en el juego. Y pues nada, pero yo hoy no estoy hablando de mi experiencia personal. O sea, si quieren saber de mi experiencia personal, pues yo he sido golpeada por policías, interrogada, me han mandado informantes para saber con quién ando, han hostigado a mis amigos, han amenazado a la gente, me han acusado de circular propaganda enemiga porque a veces Sandra me manda material para imprimir catálogos de sus exposiciones y mandarlos a Cuba. Entonces yo he tenido muchos enfrentamientos con la oficialidad, pero también tengo muchas amistades, tengo parientes en Cuba, la mayoría no trabajan en arte, pero tengo parientes en Cuba y también tengo parientes encarcelados en Cuba y también tengo parientes fuera de Cuba que están en la diáspora, en Francia, España, aquí y allá, Estados Unidos, Puerto Rico, etc. Entonces, o sea, mi experiencia cubre que es como más panorámica. Lo que pasa es que yo hablo cubano. Yo no hablo con un acento cubano porque no vivo allá, porque yo aprendí español en Estados Unidos, pero yo hablo cubano, yo entiendo el idioma cubano, que es muy difícil para un extranjero entender lo que es hablar en cubano, porque no puedes decir lo que piensas. Entonces hay que entender cómo leer lo que está sucediendo cuando alguien te habla. Muchas veces te dicen no sé porque no quieren responder. O te dicen lo opuesto de lo que piensan, porque no pueden decir lo que piensan. Me ha tocado, por ejemplo, conocer amigos en Cuba cuando eran militantes del partido y después verlos viviendo en otro país siendo militantemente anticastristas. O sea, y tú dices, bueno, ¿qué es lo que piensa esa persona? ¿No? Porque en un país te dicen una cosa y en otro país te dicen otra. También me ha tocado mucha gente que me ha pedido cartas de invitación porque quieren emigrar, gente que me ha ofrecido matrimonio porque quieren emigrar, me han ofrecido hasta $7,000 para casarme en Cuba, para sacar gente. Yo hice en los años 90, escribí una obra de teatro sobre las jineteras y también conocí a muchas cubanas que eran expertas en conseguir pasaportes a través del matrimonio. Jineteras que venían y tiraban 3, 4, 5 pasaportes en la mesa. O sea pero es muy difícil llegar a entender lo que sucede dentro de allí porque en general nadie puede decir la verdad.
¿Será esta última intervención? I will be speaking in English. Is it okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Even though I could, but not so well in Spanish. I'm actually from Russia. Bashkiria is one of the republics. But I happen to live also in the US for almost 17 years, and I visited Cuba as well, and I'm an artist, different styles. I mean, journalist, musician, a little bit artist, and so forth. And world traveler, and also I consider myself kind of visionary for a better world, and instead of criticizing all our past experiences and models, all possible models, ideas, utopias of ideal world of future, I mean that instead of criticizing what was in the past, I think that it's important to focus on our vision, what we really would like to have in future. and taking the best, however, from all the past experiences. Because so far, it's all been just social experiments. We have to take it and see it that way. And then it's never been perfect, but I guess we could always use the best from every social experiment. Like, for example, there were Christian communards, there were French communards, there was Russian socialism, communism, actually coming from the same Roman word from ancient times, commune, and that meant living just communally and again with probably same ideals of living communally, harmoniously. And then finally, we had social experiment of U.S., which is just a concentration of the whole world, right? And hoping also that all the best ideals would be implemented there. However, it also didn't go quite perfectly, maybe. What do you think? And however, if to compare specifically these two systems, socialism and capitalism, and since I happen to live in both, so I know firsthand, and also I've been traveling the world, 150 countries now, in my personal opinion and experience, I would say that still, for majority of people, socialism so far seems to be better off. And, and we shouldn't, so to speak, throw the baby with the water, like it's happened in Russia, for example, and then it affected half of the world. Actually, it's a rhetorical question, perhaps, if it is at all. I just basically just wanted to share with you my vision of ideal world, that utopian world of future, which I call rainbow world.
Well, I will answer and say, number one, I didn't say anything about getting rid of socialism, but the authoritarian strains of nationalist populism in the Latin American left and the right have caused problems all over the region for more than half a century. That's number one. Number two, many of the Cuban artists and intellectuals are interested in social democracy, but if you have a military dictatorship running the show, you cannot have a social democracy. So their objective is to develop a critique of the military dictatorship and the way that state power is exercised in Cuba, not to dispense with the idea of creating a social democracy. For there to be a social democracy, you have to have a civil society that can participate. And at present, there are no mechanisms that permit there to be a civil society, a participatory civil society in Cuba, and that is the main problem that they're addressing.
Yes, of course.
know I could write a book, and this book would be thick enough. You stand out, I could tell.